So this is a guide to revising for English with some ideas about what and how to revise for our Year 11 students. And this is for 2 GCSEs. In English, we cover GCSE language and GCSE literature. So first up are the exam dates for this round of GCSEs. The first is Wednesday, the 18th of May, and that's language paper 1. It's half the GCSE language. And then the following week, Wednesday, the 25th of May, is the literature paper 1. And students will have to answer essay questions on A Christmas Carol and Power and Conflict poetry. After the half term, Wednesday, the 8th of June, is the second literature paper, and students will have to answer questions on Macbeth, so an essay question on Macbeth, and respond to unseen poetry. And then at the end of that week, on Friday, the 10th of June, they will do their second language paper. So we don't have very long now before those exams start, and it's about using that time to its best advantage. So with that in mind, what to revise? Students have sat mocks in October and just recently in February. So based on their mocks and classwork, students need to identify which questions they specifically need to focus on, thinking about which questions they're weakest at and need the most practice on, and which of the questions will allow them to gain the most marks. So, for example, on both of the language papers, the final question is worth a lot of marks. So there are a lot to gain there. If students are unsure, they should speak to their class teacher. And I know a lot of these conversations have been taking place in identifying what they should focus their revision on in the time that they have now. And then it's about planning revision around this picture. So just for clarity, on the language GCSE, on the paper 1, it's a short story extract, and they are then asked to answer 4 questions on that. First one is selecting facts. The second question is analysing language. So if that's a question they don't perform well on, that might be a focus for revision, for example. Question 3 asks them to look at the structure of the text and make inference. And question 4 is worth a lot of marks, and that asks them to evaluate how the writer creates an impression of character or setting. And then the question 5 is actually their own writing task. They're asked to write a story, narrative writing, or a descriptive task. So it may well be that that's a focus for practicing in revision. On language paper 2, they get 2 non-fiction texts. So the big difference between the papers is this is non-fiction. And one of those texts is modern and one is an older text. Again, question 1 is about selecting, this time, 4 true statements. Question 2 might be an area to target revision, and that is about summarising the similarities or the differences between 2 texts and then making an inference, saying what's suggested about the writer's viewpoint from that, the writer's perspective. Question 3 is another analyse language question. And then question 4 on this paper asks them to compare the writer's views. And essentially, they're doing that, tracking that through the 2 texts. The final task, the writing task on this paper, is opinion writing. And students will have to write a newspaper article, a comment article in which they give their opinion about a topic. So that might be a focus for revision. On literature, they will write an essay based on an extract. They get a short extract from A Christmas Carol, and then they'll be asked to write an essay about the whole of A Christmas Carol around that extract. Power and conflict poetry. On the exam paper, 1 poem from a possibility of 15 will be named and shared, and then students will have to compare that with 1 poem they choose themselves from those 15. So they need to know maybe 4 of those poems that span the themes really well, and that they're going to make their choice, their selection from. Literature paper 2 is an essay based on Macbeth, based on an extract from Macbeth, and they're assessed on what they write there in terms of character and theme, but they are also marked on the only small mark for their spelling, punctuation and grammar. And then they're given 2 poems that are unseen poems they've never met before. The first one they need to analyse in depth, and then the second one they just need to make some comparison with. And again, there's 4 marks for their spelling, punctuation and grammar. So those are the areas of the exam papers that they may need to focus focus in on and organise their revision around. So how to revise for English? Well, in terms of literature, that is rereading the literature text, Macbeth, The Christmas Carol, the poetry, and looking at the notes, the annotations they've made on them. It's understanding the narrative arcs, what happens story-wise in those, and the character arcs. So how the characters are presented, how they change. It is writing practice essays in time. So there are lots of resources available to students that give them past questions, possible questions. They should have a go at practicing a response. English revision is very much about doing it. There are example essays available that they can read and look at what practice should look like, have ideas about how to structure a response. And for the literature, they should be creating revision notes around the key themes, ideas and quotations in the literature text that they can then test themselves on. For language, all students have notes in exercise books about each of the language questions. They should go back and reread these. They should look at the example answers for each question and remind themselves of the structures for response. How do we respond to this particular question? What do I need to include in it? They have notes on that. After doing that, they should then complete practice papers. And again, these are been made available. But focus on the key questions they know they need. So they don't have to do every question, just focus in on answering the ones that they need practice of most. They should practice writing stories and newspaper articles and practice planning out past tasks. So take past questions and think about how they would plan a response to it, even if they don't write the full response. Practice active reading in time. So this means taking those past papers with the extract texts on and read them and annotate them in time conditions, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, to ensure they understand and are practicing the approach. I would suggest that they work in 30-minute chunks and they're doing it for English 2 or 3 times a week. They can do that independently, but also work with others. They can test each other. They can listen to GCSE Pod, and they can watch some GCSE YouTube videos that I'm also going to direct you to. In terms of support in school, we've been offering period 6 sessions on a Monday throughout the year. At the moment, those are focused on poetry revision. So students should come to those sessions. There's a very short time left and get as much support as they can. If they don't need the notes on the poem or the revision of that particular poem, then they go to maths on the Monday. Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday morning form times. There are intervention booster sessions for cohorts of students. So it's just really important that they are prompt and punctual to school and they're not missing out on that. Every class has a Teams tile on Teams, and there are a whole load of revision resources that have been uploaded by class teachers there. So all the things I've talked about in terms of past papers, workbooks, things like that, there are copies of all of that online for them. In the LRC, there are CGP workbooks, and some of those have been paid for, but students haven't collected. So it's worth reminding the child to go to the LRC and collect anything that you've paid for. Those workbooks are really helpful in terms of working through each question. And then there are half-term and Easter sessions for revision. There's a list of websites here that we would recommend that students can find support and pass questions and tasks on. This again has been shared with students on Teams. And I guess it's making the most of this range of support materials. Additional to that, we have hard copies of all of these guides, papers that are available from class teachers. So students can come and collect those at any point that fits with what they're focusing their revision on. The revision videos on YouTube we would recommend most, Mr. Bruff videos, 10-minute, 8-minute videos on every question on the language paper and on all aspects of the literature, and the approach that he talks through is the same as the approach we deliver in lessons, so there will be no conflict or confusion. So students could be doing that every day, watching a video, 8 minutes, 10 minutes over the period of time they've got left now. We would suggest that they recommend that they have a revision timetable, so they actually actively map out what they're going to look at and on what days, what half an hour they're going to do this each week between now and the exams. And this is exactly the same way that we plan the teaching as well. So we make sure that we're covering what they need in the time left. Finally, I would also just remind you that we have a really good learning resource centre, a really good library in school, and students can use that space before school, after school, and certain lunch times. And Year 11s will be given priority in this space between now and their exams. So they can go and use the resources in there and the support of the Learning Resource Centre manager. In terms of things that they can get help with, revision resources in there that they can borrow, online resources, not just for English, but for lots of curriculum areas. They can use the computers in there. There are ebooks that they can download and then obviously access at home as well. It's a quiet study area. There are flip charts and pens if they want to use those resources to test each other and go in a small group. There are reference copies of all texts in there, and they can get help from the librarian. Finally, in terms of what you can do to support, being aware of what the exam papers look like and what they've got to cover in those. Know what revision materials are available so you can help direct your child to the right places. Please encourage your child to attend revision sessions often in school and at half term and Easter. And biggest thing, encouraging them to do the revision at home at this point now, in terms of having a really clear plan and them doing that and sticking to it. So if they need some help with being organised, supporting with that, those are things that we would recommend in terms of what and how to revise for English. Obviously, if you have any further questions or queries, please just email me. Thank you.